Amid high tensions between Russia and NATO over multiple issues, chief among the possibility of Ukraine's absorption into the Western alliance, Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov has indicated the possibility that Moscow could open new military facilities in Cuba and Venezuela. "I don't want to confirm anything. I won't rule anything out either," he stated, stressing that such possibilities depended on Washington's response to Russia's request for security guarantees, among which were that NATO should cease to expand. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has strongly ruled out the possibility that the alliance would limit its membership, indicating that Ukraine and possibly even Georgia could become members. This in turn would facilitate the deployment of US and other Western assets, including possibly nuclear weapons, in very close proximity to Russian territory. With NATO forces already vastly outnumbering and outspending Russian ones, this has long been seen as unacceptable for the country's security situation. Russia sources have long claimed that the withdrawal of Soviet forces from Eastern Europe was based on promises that NATO would not expand east of Germany, with the bloc's subsequent growth to now encompass almost all of Eastern Europe, including not only the former Warsaw Pact, but also parts of former Soviet territory itself and the Baltics, to be a violation of these terms and a threat. Stoltenberg notably refuted during recent tensions, this claiming NATO never pledged to stop expanding and would never pledge to do so. The Soviet Union previously had a sizable military presence in Cuba, which for much of the Cold War was the only country in the Western Hemisphere outside the Western sphere of influence. Russia closed its military facilities in Cuba, as well as in Vietnam, shortly after the Soviet collapse, but has recently sought to expand its military presence outside the former Soviet Union with new bases in Syria and possibly in Sudan. The possibility of re-establishing bases in Cuba was previously raised in 2017. During periods of high tensions between Venezuela and the United States, including in late 2018, when the possibility of an American attack on Caracas was widely being raised, Russia on multiple occasions deployed military assets to the country, including two 160 intercontinental range strategic bombers. In December 2018, the possibility was raised for permanent facilities hosting Russian bombers in the country, possibly relying on shorter-ranged strike aircraft such as the Su-34 or Tu-22M2M, which are still more than capable of striking targets across much of the United States mainland from bases in Venezuela. Russian forces are currently present in Venezuela for training purposes, with private Russian military contractors with links to the Kremlin reported to also be in the country to provide security at the request of the Venezuelan government. The top Russian diplomat on Thursday refused to rule out the possibility of Moscow sending military deployments to Cuba and Venezuela as tensions between the Putin regime and the West intensify. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov told Russian RTVI-TV he would neither confirm nor exclude the possibility of Russian deployments in the Western Hemisphere, the Associated Press reported. Ryabkov, who led the Russian delegation in discussions over Ukraine with the US Monday in Geneva, said Russia's actions all depend on the action by our US counterparts. A senior Biden administration official dismissed Ryabkov's statements on Thursday. "We are not going to respond to bluster. If Russia actually started moving in that direction, we would deal with it decisively," said the official. The idea of deploying military assets to Cuba and Venezuela is not new. Most famously, the Soviet Union's attempt to base nuclear weapons in Cuba in 1962 led to a standoff with the United States, widely considered to have been the closest the Cold War superpowers came to nuclear war. More recently, Russia has timed smaller deployments to its main allies in the Americas as a way to prop up regional regimes and to test US commitment to security in the region. In 2013 and 2018, Russian President Vladimir Putin dispatched nuclear-capable bombers to Venezuela, with the latter occurring amid chatter that the Trump administration was at least open to military options to contain the Venezuelan regime. That deployment led to a diplomatic back and forth between then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov. But Ryabkov's newest warning comes as Europe, the United States and Russia face off amid a Russian military buildup on the border with Ukraine. The U.S. ambassador to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, Michael Carpenter, on Thursday warned of the potential for military escalation, as Ryabkov said Russia saw no grounds to continue the talks in Geneva. "We're facing a crisis in European security. The drumbeat of war is sounding loud, and the rhetoric has gotten rather shrill," said Carpenter. Over the last 2 decades, Russia has perfected and surprised its foes in equal measure in its ability to intervene around the world. Perhaps no other country in the world, aside from the US, has militarily intervened in so many international conflicts in recent years to further its foreign policy objectives. And despite Russia's relatively small economic footprint, 3% of global GDP, it continues to be a military force to be reckoned with. But Russia's military intervention toolkit is bespoke and one that uniquely reflects its economic and political limits. Now, for the first time in its 30-year history, CSTO members, Russia, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, have agreed to send peacekeepers in a bid to reinforce the authority of politicians in Nur-Sultan, Kazakhstan's capital. The CSTO, in many ways, reflects Russia's security interests in its neighborhood and an attempt to consolidate a sphere of influence. The military alliance, amongst other things, ensures that members of the CSTO cannot join other military alliances, a reference to NATO, the Western military bloc led by the US. It also states, amongst other things, that any third country's military bases need the approval of all member states and that, if a foreign power attacks a member, they will come to the aid of one another. As Russia deployed elite military commandos in one part of Ukraine and eventually incorporating Crimea within Russia, an internationally contested move, in the east of the country it created and funded militias to fight against the Ukrainian government. For Russia, Ukraine holds deep social and cultural importance. It also is wary that the country, which shares a border with Europe, could move out of its orbit of influence. Moscow has demanded guarantees for years that its neighbor will never join NATO, reassurances that the US has failed to provide.